Okay, so now we've gone over a lot of the kind of easier pieces, and at some point you'll have to move on to the names of all of those little foraminas. So I want to give you some more tips to kind of attack that kind of information. So the first thing is when you're looking at those little holes, the names of those holes is very often tied to, well, what do they look like, or sometimes to their function. And when I say function, I mean like what passes through it. Okay, so let's look at some of those. So what I would like to do is I'm going to go through it on the picture, but then I also want to show you what it looks like on my model. Here is the optic canal. So here in pink, this is the sphenoid bone here. Here's the sella turcica. There is a canal that runs through it. And notice that it's a canal. It's not a foramen. And that's because instead of just being a hole, it's like a tube that runs through. Why do you think it's called optic canal? Optic canal. Okay? So it starts here. Where does it come out? Where's the other end of that? It's going to be inside. Okay? So when you look through the eye hole, through the orbit, there's 3 holes in there. 2 of them are long slits. Those are called fissures. Anytime you have a long slit like that, those are fissures. But then you also have a really, really round hole deep in there. That really, really round hole, that's going to be the optic canal. Optic canal. Okay? The next one is the foramen rotundum. Rotundum. What does it mean to be rotund? Rotund means round, right? Like round, okay? So the foramen rotundum, that's going to be the one that's really nice and round, and again, it's still on the sphenoid bone. Right next to the foramen rotundum is going to be the foramen ovale, okay? I like to pronounce it like this because it's like it's oval, but it has an E. So that's why I say foramen ovale, okay? Ovale, that's this oval-shaped one here. And then next to that is the foramen spinosum, like spine. That's how I remember it. To me, I tell myself a little story. I pretend that I'm hanging out next to the foramen ovale, and then right next to me, somebody took a nice sharp spine, okay, a nice sharp spine, and stuck it in, made a tiny little puncture hole. That's going to be the foramen spinosum. Spinosum has a spiny puncture hole. Okay, that's going to be at the boundary between the sphenoid bone and the temporal bone right here. Now coming back over to here, this is the foramen lacerum. Lacerum. I think of foramen, remember that means hole, that's lacy. And the reason I say that is because this particular hole, it doesn't have a smooth boundary edge like most of the other holes. Instead, it's really kind of ragged and rough. It looks lacy around the edges. Okay, so that's the foramen lacerum. Okay, so lacerum is how you would say that. Okay, so foramen or foramen, again, however you want to say that, lacerum has lacy edges, rough edges, not smooth. Okay, so now next piece, internal acoustic meatus. Okay, let's go back to that. When you look at the lateral side of the bone, of the skull, there's this big hole. What is that hole for? That's your ear canal. Okay, so that is going to be the external acoustic meatus. And acoustic relates to ear, hearing, external being on the outside. What is a meatus? What's a meatus? So a meatus means it's a canal-like hole. Okay, so again, it's similar to a canal in that instead of just being like a hole, it's like you've tunneled into it. That's a meatus. Okay, so again, knowing what those terms means is really going to help you. Now, because it's acoustic, what this is this is the hole that is used by the nerve that brings hearing information to the brain. It's got to exit to the brain through the bone that way. And so this hole right here is going to be oriented, pointing laterally towards where the ears would be. Okay, so if it's on the back side, so when you look inside of here, inside of see how this looks like a little mountain range? This is part of the temporal bone, and that's called the petrous part. Petrous part is referring to the mountain range of the temporal bone. If you're on the posterior side, so the back side of the mountain, and you have a tube-like hole pointing toward the ear, that's going to be the internal acoustic meatus, and it will be fairly small. Underneath that, we have the jugular foramen. The jugular foramen, and it's called that because it contains the jugular vein. And the distinctive part about this is that instead of being round, it's kidney bean shaped. It's got this strange little dip at the top, and it's rather large. Okay, so that's the jugular foramen there. And then again, we have the hypoglossal canal, again named by the nerve that passes through it, and canal because it's deep. Okay, so for the hypoglossal canal, if you look at, oh, there we go. Okay, so here is the big hole. What the name of the big hole would be the foramen magnum, and then these little, these parts right here that articulate with the vertebrae, the very first top vertebrae with the atlas. That's called the occipital condyle. And so running underneath it, I kind of think of it like a bridge. Okay, so like water under the bridge. The hypoglossal canal is going to be the canal, the hole that runs underneath or through, right underneath the hypoglossal, right underneath the occipital condyle. So it's like the occipital condyle is the bridge, and the hole under the bridge is going to be the hypoglossal canal. Okay, don't forget to look underneath. So I would like to go ahead and pause. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to look at these a little bit closer, okay? And I want to show you what it would look like in a 3D object. So this first one here, okay, on the sphenoid bone, this is going to be the optic canal, and we can also see the optic canal looking inside the orbit of the eye. It's the super round one in there. And then the next one would be the foramen rotundum. Okay, that right there, that little tiny divot on my model, that's the foramen rotundum. And then this part here is the foramen ovale. The one that looks like I punctured it with a spine is the foramen spinosum. And this one with kind of irregular edges is the foramen lacerum. I think of like lacerum here. And then here, so notice that this part, this is the petrous part here. If we look on the back side of the mountain, okay, so on the posterior part of the petrous part, this little canal that would be running towards the ears, towards, where your ears would be, that would be the internal acoustic meatus. And then the bigger one underneath that, that would be the jugular foramen. Okay, so tip number 4. So for most classes, and especially my class, you will only have to learn the skull bones articulated, which means put together. And the good news about that is that because it's all put together, these holes are going to be in a particular order. And so one thing that you can do is you can kind of memorize them in a particular shape. Okay, and let me tell you what I mean by that. When you look at these Foramina, you'll notice that they create basically two kind of diagonal lines. Okay, so here's one diagonal line, here's the other diagonal line. In the first diagonal line, we have the optic canal, we have the foramen rotundum, the foramen ovale, the foramen spinosum, and then kind of jump back over to the next line, we have the foramen lacerum, the internal acoustic meatus, and then the jugular foramen. Okay, so you kind of break up the information by learning it in kind of two different rows. Another thing that you can do, because it's in an order, is you can use an acronym. You can use a mnemonic device. And so one way to do that is to memorize a phrase, and then the beginning of each phrase stands for part of the order. Okay, so for example, one thing I found on the internet is old rotund owls spin lazily across jugs. Old rotund owls spin lazily across jugs. Now, one thing that I do like about this sort of mnemonic device is that it does use parts of the names in there, and that helps kind of, you know, figure out where you are. Like, for example, rotund, that's the big fat owl. Spin, like spinosum. We have jug, starting jugular. So this is a pretty good mnemonic device. But if it doesn't work for you, if you're like, what is rotund? What owls? What? Make your own. There's nothing that says you have to use somebody else. In fact, the best mnemonic devices are the ones that are personal to you. Okay? So you just sit down and just make your own mnemonic device, and I tell you, it's going to be with you forever. So that's a good strategy. Okay, so we're at the end. I do want to kind of review what I talked about. So tip number 1 was study broad to specific. Don't just sit down with your list and start going through every piece one at a time. You want to learn all the whole bones first and then go down to the specifics. Okay, so and the point for that is if you do for some reason run out of time during studying, at least you've learned all the whole bones, and that will help you out immensely. If for all the words in a name have a purpose, if you can figure out what that purpose is, that's going to help you remember. Also, just kind of make yourself tell stories to yourself. Once you do get to the foramina inside of the skull, you want to kind of do multiple things. I would go ahead and make up a mnemonic device, but then I would also kind of check myself by learning some of the shapes and sizes. Okay, so one of the things that you want to be careful about for mnemonic devices is that if you start in the wrong spot, everything's off. So you want to make sure that you know at least a couple of the ones that are really distinctive. Make sure you know where those are and kind of use them as placeholders as you work your way through. Okay, so for example, if you get to, ovale and you're not on one that's oval shaped, you're probably not in the right spot. Okay. Okay, so good luck out there. I think you guys can do it. It does take a lot of practice, but you can do this. You definitely can do this. Bye-bye. Have fun.